Hi, so I'm Samantha Siedlecki, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut who works very closely with fisheries oceanographers as well as physical and biogeochemical scientists at NOAA and NOAA affiliates on a seasonal forecast system called JSCOPE, which I'm going to talk to you about today. JSCOPE stands for JISAO Seasonal Coastal Ocean Prediction of the Ecosystem. JISAO is a cooperative institute that once existed for more than 40 years at University of Washington and is now called CISES. And so you can see the list of the main collaborators, although there are others as well. But I'll talk more about their work as we go forward. So today I'm going to talk to you about JSCOPE in reference to this data management and product development aspect of ocean acidification program's research portfolio. Specifically, this addressed as theme 4 of the 2010 research plan. And that JSCOPE forecasts ocean conditions, which include ocean acidification variables, to support decisions from fishery management. So forecasts, especially ocean forecasts, are something that's needed for fishery management, and there's a broad base of literature that supports that. But one particular article of interest is from Tomasi et al. In 2017, and it highlights the importance of seasonal forecasts in terms of fishery management. And this figure here shows you this time on the x-axis and then spatial scales here on the y-axis. And you can see in these colored circles the different types of decisions that fishery management would make on these various time scales, and then the particular phenomenon in climate that would correspond to those, some of which are more predictable than others, right? And on seasonal time scales, the ENSO, PDO, monsoon, mid-latitude high and low pressure systems, those are all kind of important physical phenomenon that lead to predictability. And the fishery management decisions on those timescales include things like monitoring closures, annual catch limits, and then as you get further out into the decadal, we start to go into some more long-term planning. So these forecasts on any timescale, whatever timescale you're looking to forecast, need to be tailored to the particular needs of that fishery, and that each stakeholder and fishery manager requires forecasts of a particular variable. And so figuring out what those variables are, what those indices are, is part of the research that we do. And it's important to test the model performance specifically on those particular variables of interest. And if you can work that out, then there's societal benefit if the model has skill in forecasting those particular variables. So in this case, there was a need for ocean acidification variables that JSCOPE was responding to. So how do we build a forecast system? So our forecast system is based, we use a climate forecast system, which is a NOAA product that's a seasonal forecast. It's a global coupled atmosphere ocean seasonal forecast system that makes their results available publicly many times a day. And it's pretty coarse in resolution, but we work that out by embedding or downscaling a regional ocean model, a ROMS-based model that uses the UW's Cascadia model setup. It's high resolution, about 1.5 kilometers. And then the variables that are output include physical as well as biogeochemical variables. You can find more about the Cascadia model setup on Parker McCready's website at UW, and then the entire system setup in my paper from 2016. So those ocean conditions then, those ocean forecasts are then used in order to generate habitat models and species-specific indices in order to directly support decisions that the particular fishery is making. And so in that case, we started with sardine, but now we've worked more with subsurface habitats like hake and juvenile crab and adult crab. And some of that work is on its way out the door, even though it's not completely ready yet. So these forecasts are live and ported through our regional IUS portal called NANUS, and they have been since 2013. So and that includes variables like aragonite saturation state, pH, oxygen, PCO2, which you're seeing a movie of here. And so what you're looking at is so this is the outer shelf, and then as you move, this is the outer shelf here, and then as you move towards, it gets shallower. There's a slice here through on the shelf, And then this is the coastline all here. So it's kind of like a bird's eye view from the offshore looking towards the coast. And what this lets you see is all the spatial variability that the forecast is imparting. And so this is from 2016, and it's really zoomed in on the northern tip of Washington, which is the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, which is now an ocean acidification sentinel site. And you can see that sometimes when there's low pH conditions or undersaturated with respect to with aragonite, you don't necessarily see those low oxygen conditions, and so we can kind of investigate the co-occurrence of these stressors in the forecast space as well. But we need to test these forecasts and see how well they perform, and that requires observations. And so these observations are used to help the model in order to improve it and test it, but the model can also feedback and help the observing as well. So this is an example of that. So here we're looking at a 5-month forecast of the depth of the saturation horizon. On the left, you see the forecast. On the right, you see the cruise data from the West Coast Ocean Acidification cruise that went out in 2016. And in this case, the forecast was produced in January, and so was prior to the cruise, and so it was available for cruise planning purposes. So the scientists that went out were, we presented a webinar to them and delivered the forecast as well as it being available on the web, and so they were able to use it for cruise planning purposes. The Northern California current system, where this forecast system is situated, happens to be an excellent test bed because it has high predictive skill. And this has been shown by others as well. Mike Jaycox led a study in 2017 showing that the Northern California current system experiences greater skill, in particular at sea surface temperature, than regions further south. We've tested the biogeochemistry as well. So in my work from 2016, you can see on the right here that sea surface temperature, bottom temperature, and bottom oxygen were all tested, and that the subsurface variables, the bottom temperature and bottom oxygen, seem to have greater predictive skill, as indicated by higher correlation between the anomalies in the forecast and the anomalies of the historical simulations, and the correlation indicated by the color there. So those greater red regions have a high positive correlation. And we've also done some work to show that investigating the mechanisms that drive that, and it seems that subsurface mechanisms may differ from the surface mechanisms that are linked directly to ENSO, and that they may be more influenced by, seem to be more influenced by the variability in the North Pacific, and that warrants more study. There's a paper that's in press now, led by my postdoc, Siedlecki Ray. So, but the point is that we can forecast these conditions and on seasonal timescales for these relevant metrics for fisheries. One example of that is this habitat for juvenile crabs here, which is, so these larval stages of Zuia and Megalope. There we have long-term observations that the Bonneville Power Association has been doing surveys historically for quite some time that we use in order to generate a habitat for those larval stages, which are pelagic. Once they settle 4 years later, they become the adult size that we fish for the Dungeness crab, currently. It turns out that we ended up using a biological ensemble of different behaviors, and that included environmental exposure variables like the severity index for saturation state as well as pH in the habitat model formulation. You can find out more details in the paper led by Emily Norton that was published in 2020. And you can see here that from this map, which shows you again, testing with observations, the presence and absence of, observed presence and absence of the megalope in 2017, and then the forecasted field here. So the warmer colors indicate where you'd find the crab, and that was in fact where we found the crab. So this was a out of sample test, so not something we used in order to generate the fields. And the AUC skill there is 0.94, which is very good. So our key takeaways: that seasonal forecasts of ocean conditions are underway by this Facebook system, and they're hosted on the web via our regional IUS portal, NANUS, since 2013. We co-developed a lot of these fields and they're also used by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Quinault Indian Nation, resource managers, as well as the NOAA Northwest Fisheries Science Center Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Partners. And that was really vital to figuring out how these information could be used. The Northern California current has particularly high seasonal predictability, so it's a good region to test these applications in. And the predictability and the performance testing suggests that the best skill for the bottom conditions, including temperature and oxygen, which are both important for the habitat of crabs. The JISAO forecast ocean conditions are already included in the ecosystem status report and presented to the Pacific Fishery Management Council, including our ocean acidification variable forecasts like saturation state every year. So that's been going on since 2018. So looking forward, I think we need a better understanding of the sources of predictive skill for the biogeochemistries in particular. A lot of work has gone into the physics and understanding the predictability of temperature. And so we need to know where the predictive skill is coming from the biogeochemistry in the forecast space, and a real process-based understanding so that we can either get better observations to support these forecasts or and then like have more confidence in them going forward. Indirect ecosystem impacts of ocean acidification are also vital to integrate into management. So ocean acidification could impact the prey species of a fish, for example, and sort of how we would bring that information into management and what we could do there. An example would be like euphausids or krill, you know, they've been shown to be sensitive sensitive to ocean acidification variables, and but how exactly that information we could bring that into management is something a research issue to work on. There's also the issue of ocean acidification and HABs that we could think about bringing in as well, both indirect and direct impacts. Then with these forecasts, there's a big data issue, sort of making these forecast fields. We make them visually available on the web, but sort of making the actual fields available for download and analysis by other groups would only increase the amount of research going into these species-specific you know, measures and fields and research into those kinds of indices. And it's a challenge to do that because it's a big data issue. And finally, the forecasts, you know, transitioning them to operations within NOAA, it's not really clear to those of us that are developing those how we would do that and sort of what pathways exist for sort of regional operational management of these forecast systems. And so, you know, we need to be thinking about how we would do that while still keeping up this this co-management, you know, or this co-development aspect, which means that there's a lot of interactions between people making local observations and local decisions. So with that, I'll thank you for your time.